Welcome back to Andersen Acres. We are in the kitchen again today, and today we are going to make a coffee cake dough. Now, we're not actually going to bake anything with this coffee cake dough today. Instead, what we're going to do is show you how to make a coffee cake dough. Then we're going to put it in the fridge. It needs to be refrigerated for at least overnight, but preferably closer to 24 hours. And then in the next video, the following week, next week, I am going to show you one of the many coffee cake dough recipes I like to do. But for today, let's just make the dough. Remember, you can make this in a large batch and freeze it. It does freeze well. Just let it come to room temperature before you start to work with it, because frozen dough doesn't help anybody. So let's get started. Coffee cake dough, how do we make it? We start with 1 cup of milk in a small saucepan. Okay, just 1 cup of milk, and you do have to use milk. Water doesn't work this time. Now you're going to do half a cup of butter or margarine. Margarine's fine. I'm using butter, but margarine will work just fine. It doesn't really matter for this particular recipe. Now we're going to take this over to the stove. I'm not going to film that part because it's really boring, but we're going to take this over to the stove and we're going to heat it medium low. Do not go above medium heat, but we're going to heat it on the stove until that margarine is melted. Butter, sorry. I'm just thinking margarine because I told you could use margarine. So let your butter or your margarine melt. And you want the milk to be fairly warm, not scalding, but pretty warm. We'll come back when this has been heated and the milk is fairly warm and that butter has melted. All right, so our milk and our butter are melted and warm and all good, okay? So now we're gonna work on making the actual dough. You're going to want to put 3 cups of flour in a bowl. Can you make this with a mixer or in your bread maker? Sure, but since we're not allowing it to rise, doing it by hand is actually faster. So I'm doing it by hand today, but feel free to use your mixer or to use your bread maker to do the mix cycle. Just make sure you remove it before we get to the rise cycle. So let's add some more ingredients. 3 cups of flour, 1/4 cup of sugar. Give that a mix. And this is sitting cooling, by the way, because it needs to cool a little bit. 1 teaspoon of salt. I was going to say yeast. No, that's salt. I'm just using sea salt today. You can use any salt you have. Table salt, kosher, Himalayan, doesn't matter. 2 teaspoons of yeast. I recommend for this particular recipe use an instant or a bread machine yeast, because we're not allowing the yeast to dissolve in a liquid. We're mixing it into our flour mixture. You're going to add 2 eggs. And yes, my yolks got a little bit wonky. Too bad for me. It's because I suck. Break up those egg yolks. Get them started in here. Okay. Break those egg yolks. And yes, my chickens are laying again because they're not dumb. So I have freshly laid eggs. There we go. All right, once you have that mixed up, take your milk and butter mixture and pour that right into the middle there. And I'm going to put this in the sink. Okay, there we go. Now we're just going to give that a bit of a mix with our wooden spoon, but we're going to have to use our hands in a minute. So I've taken off my ring because we're going to have to use our hands. So mix it as long as you can with the wooden spoon, but you're going to get to a point where it looks like this and you can't anymore. Also, you should have half a cup of standby flour, which I have sitting over there. You should have half. Actually, I'll go grab it. There it is. Half a cup of standby flour in case this is too sticky, and it almost certainly will be. But don't add the entire half a cup at once because you don't want to overwhelm your dough and then have to add more liquid. Don't do that. So, slow and steady. Okay, so I am going to add some of my flour. So this is half a cup. You won't need more than that. And now we're just going to get rid of the wooden spoon. And just start Now this is very warm, so it helps activate that yeast. So we're just going to scrape the sides of the bowl with it. There we go. And what we want is a stiffer dough than that. Okay, so we are going to add some more flour to that. We want a stiffer dough. We don't want it quite so pliable because it hasn't risen yet, and you don't want it quite so sticky. So you don't want it actively sticking to your hands when you pull your hands out. Okay, you want it more like it's starting to be now. But I'm probably going to add the entire half cup of flour. Remember that we added quite a lot of butter, and there's the 2 eggs. So your liquid proportion is actually higher than that single cup of milk. So you probably will need to use extra flour unless your humidity is really low where you are, and it's not here. It's pretty high here. There we go. So this will form a nice dough. And then again, we're not doing anything with it in this video. We will do that in next week's video. This week, we're just making the dough and letting it sit. Now this can be used for a lot of different things. You can use it for any kind of coffee cake you like. And yeah, there's a 1/4 cup of sugar because coffee cakes are sweeter, but it's still yeast based. So it's not a quick recipe because you obviously need to let it set overnight. It's actually really important to develop the proper texture and the proper flavor of your dough. So don't try to rush this and take it now and turn it into anything, because that won't work. So we're just going to finish rolling it on the sides here. We're not really kneading it because just by you working the dough around the bowl and picking up the extra flour and stuff, we'll automatically knead it. Now we're going to get rid of the bowl, put this on our mat. And yes, I do recommend using a silicone baking mat because this dough is a little stickier than you might be used to. So a silicone baking mat just helps you make sure that you're not going to stick all over the counter, because counters are not non-stick. The mat is, so we don't have so much sticking happening. And what we want to do is just make it a decent kind of ball-like shape. It doesn't have to be a perfect ball, and it won't stay in a perfect ball. It's a pretty loose dough, and we kind of want that. I'm just going to take a minute to wash my hands. All right, hands washed. We now need plastic wrap. If you have like beeswax wraps or something, then you can use those. But I'm using plastic wrap. Just going on top of it. Breaking the plastic wrap off. But if you have beeswax wrap, that would actually be even better because it's better for the environment than plastic wrap. All of my beeswax wraps are currently in use. So we're using plastic wrap. And yes, I do need more beeswax wraps. Okay, just get that wrapped up. Remember, it is still a pretty loose and sticky dough. So it does move around a lot, which is fine. There we go. Just get it wrapped up. You don't need to wrap it super tight because it is going to rise a little bit in the fridge. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this dough, okay, we're going to stick it in the fridge, and we're going to leave it there overnight. So you can turn this into all manner of things. So some things I like doing an apple coffee cake. I like doing a pineapple coffee cake. I like just doing a regular streusel coffee cake. There are a lot of different ways you can use this dough. This is a very simple, sweet dough that you can use to make all kinds of different desserts. If you like, it is a yeast-based dough. And I'm just going to get a little more plastic wrap for that one side. But it is a yeast-based dough. So it does rise, it does take a little time, but the results are really worth it. So this freezes really, really well. So feel free to put this in the freezer as is. So you can just take it the way it is, stick it in the freezer, and everything will turn out just really nice. Because it does freeze well, just remember, let it come to room temperature before you start working with it. Don't try to work with frozen dough. That never helped anybody. So I'm going to pop this in the fridge, and then when I do turn it into, I'm not sure if I'm going to do a pineapple coffee cake or a streusel. I'm probably just doing a streusel. But whatever I do with it, I will video that and show you what you can do with that. So tune in next week, next Sunday, to see what we can do with this dough. And then for a few weeks in a row, I'm going to be making different coffee cakes because they're a lot of fun and my dad really likes them and so does my mom. So I'm going to make sure I make some of this stuff for them. But that is about it for us today here at Andersen Acres. We'll see you tomorrow.